Okay, so welcome councillors and staff to tonight's select member briefing. Just in starting tonight's meeting, I'd just like to first acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional owners of the Whyalla people, and to acknowledge that the lands in our region belong to the Whyalla people, and acknowledge them as the traditional custodians from the past, for the present and into the future. Whyalla people are strong and are continuously connecting to their culture and their country, and Whyalla City Council and the Whyalla people will work together to build a stronger future. So tonight's elected member briefing is a little bit more of a deep dive to some of the subject matter that we commenced on the first councillor briefing a couple of weeks ago. We'll take the opportunity tonight to provide a little bit more information about our city. So some information about population, demographics and the like. A little bit more information about the state significant projects, noting that there will be some probably some significant cabinet and or minister announcements around those projects within the next week or two. Regional and local planning, context and planning, some refresh and more information regarding our strategic management framework, both in terms of our planning and our report and performance measurements. Some information about the CEO's employment agreement and the performance review of the CEO's performance, and then an update regarding the civic building and our planned temporary relocation to the Edward John Eyre High School. Just before we jump into the content, is there any questions that any councillors have got in terms of tonight's agenda? No? All right. Just for the benefit of the recording and people viewing this video at a later stage, we've got just a couple of little technical glitches that we're trying to work through with some technology, with some of the devices, including my own, which hopefully we'll sort out shortly. So anyway, we'll get into the details. So just a little bit more about our city. So we're now starting to receive the first product of the last census that was done back in 2021. Where a lot of the infographics and the information that we presented to the community in the past was based on the 2016 census. We've now been able to refresh some of that data with 2021 data. So in terms of population, we have had a slight decline in the population. Councillors might note, however, that the recent Regional Australia Institute published some data regarding the fast-moving local government areas, and Whyalla was actually listed as one of the top 5 cities around the country in terms of increasing population. So I think whilst that graph shows that we're on a bit of a decline from 2016 to 2021, the state significant projects in particular, as well as some of the investment that council has been making in terms of improving the livability and amenity of our city, we're expecting that population number will start to head north quite significantly from this point on. We have had a slight increase in the number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who live in our city compared to 2016, so up to 5.1. Previously we were 4.7. And I'll just make note in passing that as a council, we're particularly keen to support Indigenous employment as part of our reconciliation action plan as an employer and as a council. And this year recruited our first Indigenous trainee, and hopefully next year we'll be looking at getting 3 or 4 more Indigenous trainees. Again, we'll unpack that a bit later in the session. Slight increase in the number slight decrease in the number of people born overseas compared to 2016, down from 18.4 to 17.8. 30.8% of our population has completed high school compared to 34% in 2016. So a bit of a decline in that in index or indice. However, 43.1% of adults have a vocational or higher education compared to 40% in 2016. So that might be some of the people coming into our city potentially having higher vocational or education qualifications than what was the case before. And 57.5% of our population is aged between 20 and 65 years of age, compared to 46% for the 20 to 60 age bracket in 2016. So slightly younger population overall than was the case in 2016. In terms of our city, we touched on a number of the strategic policy documents that inform our strategic planning at the last session, one of which is the Public Health Plan. So under the Public Health Act, Council is responsible for the wellbeing of our city, including the preparation of a public health plan for our region. In preparing that public health plan, we had consultants do some work to look at some of the health and ageing and morbidity data for our population. We pulled out just a couple of the headline figures there. So per 10,000 head of population, we have 3,791 people admitted to hospitals compared to a state average of 3,575. Noting that 10% of the people that get admitted to our public hospital in Whyalla for preventable illnesses or matters. Obesity rates, we have 38.6 adults per 100 compared to the state average of 32.8. Adults who smoke, we have 22.7% compared to the state average of 15.4. In terms of higher alcohol consumption compared to the state, we have 19.3 adults per 100 having more than 2 drinks per day compared to 15.3% at 15.3 for the state. And we have 43.5% of our people over the age of 18 that have less than balanced diets compared to the state average of 49.1. That's one metric that we actually did better on compared to the state average, which is interesting compared to some of those other ones. Respiratory related hospital admissions, again, we're above the state average at 2,289 per 100,000 compared to the state average of 1,614. And our rates of asthma is 14.2, which compares to the state average of 12.5. Then it's worth noting that our rates of hospitalisation admissions are lower in Whyalla with 123 per 100,000 compared to the state average of 157 per 100,000. And as noted on the board, women are reported to have higher rates compared to men with 19.9% compared to 16.4% per 100 people. Yep.
In regard to respiratory-related hospital admissions, that's a significant gap. I'm just wondering whether we have any data on cigarette sales in Whyalla compared with elsewhere, state average or whatever, because that might tell the story.
Yeah, well, certainly if you look at that previous statistic that looked at the number of smokers in Whyalla compared to the state average, we are significantly above the state average. So I think that it's fair to extrapolate that the number of cigarettes purchased in Whyalla would be higher than the state average. and could be, as you said, contributing to the respiratory challenges that some of our population have. We'll move on to our city. So during the term of the last council, we started to talk about the importance of civic leadership within our city. And in different forums, I would ask the question of different groups that I interacted with, who are the leaders within our city? Who are those people that when they speak, people tend to stop and listen to, and would tend to follow those leaders lead on certain matters. And quite often the response that I would get would either be potentially a pretty blank face with no response, or the other typical response that I would receive is that people would start to quote institutions, not people. So they would talk about council, or they'd talk about Mission Australia or Centrelink as the leaders within our community. What become obvious, and certainly as being new to the city about 2 years ago, entering into what has been a never ever enduring conversation about the beach cafe, is that there is an interesting demographic and an interesting psyche to our community. With the demographic that we have, we know that there are some people in our community that are challenged, putting food on their table each and every day, getting their kids to go to school every school day, finding meaningful employment and the like. And we know that as a consequence of that disengagement from either education or employment, some people unfortunately tend to then get engaged with less than desirable activities. One of those less than desirable activities is quite a significant use of social media, typically with a very negative sort of perspective coming to the fore. And it was interesting in some of those conversations that I had with different groups, and it ranged from everything from the Rotary Club through to the Whyalla Business and Tourism, through to some not-for-profit organisations. And when I started to ask questions about our community and some of the less than desirable activity within our community, the question would ask, well, who are the leaders that are actually going to help change or address some of the antisocial behaviour that does exist? And with the council group and in those forums, I talked about as a leader of an organisation, so within the administration of council, there is an old saying that the behaviour that you walk past is the behaviour you accept. And if you apply that thinking at the scale of a city, there are some behaviours and activities that are happening within our city that as leaders, we can either walk past and say either that's just part of Whyalla and we just accept that that is Whyalla and that's who we are, or we say that's not really the community that we represent and the community that we want to have going forward. So that entered or delivered us to a conversation about what is the role of elected members in terms of civic leadership and civic governance. Who are the other civic leaders or leaders within our community, and how do we empower those leaders to be leaders within our community, and how do we address the personality and identity and the psyche of the city going forward, because there are many people within our community that are deficit wired. They don't see the positive. They tend to maybe look in the past. They're very challenged, and their frame of reference is very close. Their capacity and or capability to raise their eyes and think aspirationally about what might happen in 5 years or 10 years is really constrained. And if you think about the Maslow hierarchy of needs, there are some people that are really challenged with those really basic and core things that, so they're in survival mode, not thriving mode. So we started to unpack that, particularly with the former elected member group. We want to roll that conversation through to this current council and to have a conversation around what is the identity and persona of our city, both now and what we want it to be in the future. You know, what is the gap, and what role has council got to play in terms of trying to bridge that gap or to influence the way that our city functions, the way that we talk about ourselves within the city, the way we interact with each of ourselves within the city, but then also the perception that we create for people outside of our city. And it's interesting, coming back to that beach cafe story and some of the learnings, you know, there's a lot of discussion around Whyalla being a very resilient community. You know, we've battled hard, and you can see some of the headlines there in the past. You know, Whyalla has had a challenged history where not that long ago, through the REM receivership period, there was a lot of doom and gloom about the future of the steelworks, and the city being traditionally a BHP town, a one company town. If you actually start to unpack why is it that things are the way they are now, it's really quite interesting to think about the evolution of Whyalla to this point, and the pulse and the psyche of the city now, when we're on the cusp of some really exciting change opportunities for our city. How do we encourage and support our community through that change, and to actually get that collective focus on that positivity and that forward-looking focus, as opposed to some of the negativity that I'm sure all of you have probably experienced in some shape or form or otherwise in the past. So did you want to add at all to that, Kathy?
No, not really. I mean, I think that as the slide up there says, pulse in the city, the hidden dimension, we talk, and a lot of our plans are around the infrastructure and around the services that council provides, and that the city is growing, that the actual psychology of the city, and how do we actually enliven the psychology of the city into one which is focused on well-being, one which is focused on the future, one which is focused on positivity and excitement about the things that are happening and that are here now, rather than there being a predisposition to we like what we've had, we want to stay with what we've got, and therefore blocking development as it comes forward. You know, it's about how do we show then, and how do we bring the leadership, the civic leadership, and enliven the civic leadership across the city to actually start those positive conversations happening. There's a lot of it now, and it is starting to happen by virtue of the excitement that's coming into the city. But if we actually work on it, design it, build it, and grow it, we can take it even further than what it could go itself.
Just before we move on, did any councillors want to make any comments at all in relation to that item?
Yeah, Justin, I'd like to. I mean, I agree with everything you've said, and I think we'll find the positivity will raise a little bit as things start to develop. I mean, one of the big criticisms, you know, we see you've got to travel to Adelaide if you've got any sort of health issues. You know, it's hard to get seen here on the weekend at the hospital if you break an arm playing footy and that sort of stuff. But I think once things start to kick off and allied health systems and services get better, and people get that little bit of confidence that if they do get sick or having a baby on the weekend or breaking a leg or something playing footy or netball, you will get seen here and you get fixed. And they're the sort of things I think hold us back a little bit at different times. But, you know, I talk to a lot of people through sport and wild business tourism and work, and you know, everybody's a lot more positive than what they were 12 months ago. And I think once we actually see things after these announcements from the state government in the next couple of weeks or so, I really think that the cycle will start to change, and we'll start doing a gradual climb to, but, you know, it's just around the things, you know, mental health, allied health services, and those sort of services. Once people see that, you know, they're getting those services are starting to filter through, it'll be a lot better.
Thanks, Justin. Had a few points to raise, and it's really awesome to see that this is being discussed at this level, and I think more of it in more depth. I think it's the hidden dimension. I think the hidden opportunity as well, because there's so much to be excited about, but people just a lot of the demographics in Whyalla, for reasons that you've mentioned, just aren't seeing it, aren't aware of it, are waiting until they'll believe it when they see it. And I think that's a huge opportunity to shift that around and say, well, you'll see it when you believe it. And when you start putting that, the faith into it to start with. And one of the discussions we had very briefly was how much does the morale of the city impact on the opportunities that are tangible and about to break dirt in the next years? I just think that's the hidden gem. That is the real opportunity. What is the cost of that? I mean, obviously we'll have to invest and lead, but I think that's the low-hanging fruit, and it's the potential, the greatest potential on the well-being, on the mental health of the community, and then that's going to allow them to enjoy the next season of Whyalla even more. A couple of points that I wanted to ask was, I think Kathy mentioned as well, I guess more how do we do this? But as the Whyalla economy improves and these projects get off the ground, how do we tether that growth to the psyche growth? So how do we make sure that they go along in parallel? And ideally, I think that well-being to lead the growth of the economy would be even better. And one point on social media is I'm just not sure how to inevitably handle it, or just let it go through the keeper, or what. But certainly that's a space that a lot of people in Whyalla play in, and it seems to be dominated by those noisy minority that are very negative. What's the group consensus on? Do you just let it go? Do you just ignore it? Is there a way that we can influence that, or do we influence it in other ways? I'd be interested in what that feedback is.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we will do some more deep diving into our social media policy as well as our communication and engagement strategies. And again, accordingly, what identity and persona does the council itself, being the elected member body, want to have in terms of shaping some of that community narrative? Councillor Todd?
Yeah, just a couple of comments really. So one of the comments was around the social media. From my experience, social media, Facebook in particular, is very much keyboard warriors, people in a particular age bracket. So I would say, the 25 to 35 age group. Others tend to be on different platforms, not Facebook, in my experience. I think older people have different ways of gathering and sharing information. I've got a lot of friends my age, so 50 plus, who aren't on social media at all and don't often know what's going on with council or within Whyalla, except from what they've heard on the grapevine. So I'd be keen to explore other ways of sharing information. Just a comment as well on the negative people that are on Facebook. Again, in my experience, is that there's a small group of people that wouldn't matter if gold coins were falling from the sky, they would, be complaining about the fact that it was giving them a headache. So some people you just aren't ever going to please, for whatever reason. Just a comment as well on people's perspective. I get a lot of tourists coming in, and I get a lot of people coming in and just chatting about nothing in particular when they come in the shop. And one of the things that gets talked about a lot is the police force that we have, and this is not it's about the fact that a lot of our police officers are very young, very inexperienced, and not invested in Whyalla because they're here for a short time, not a long time. So they come, they do what they have to do, and they leave. So I'd be keen to explore that as well, because a lot of people comment on the lack of response and the lack of interest when they have any issues from the policing side of things. I don't know what the solution is. I don't know what all of the problems are, but I was sitting having breakfast the other morning and looking at a group of police officers, and I swear half of them looked like they were 12. Obviously they weren't, but they were very, very young. And it's a comment that's made a lot about the young, inexperienced officers that we have, and the fact that they're not invested in our community because they come, do what they have to do, and leave. How do we lobby for something different?
Can I say a lot of the police resources, I understand, are tied up in DV situations. What I was going to comment on is Facebook. In the life of the previous council, it was basically left to us council members to respond to comments on Facebook. And more recently, the administration's got involved in answering them. And I feel there's a lot more trust when they answer than when councillors answer. So full marks to administration for starting to respond to issues on Facebook. More.
Just going back to where you started, I think the negativity is a fair group of Whyalla that have been told this will happen, that will happen, this is going to happen. And I think when this starts, the mentality will change because we'll see things happening instead of not happening.
Thank you for those contributions. It's certainly an area that we're keen to do some more work in. Just two things to add. One was from the Beach Cafe experience, the sense of that the importance that the community place on losing something they've got as opposed to getting something that they haven't got is quite an interesting dynamic within the local community. And again, for the Beach Cafe experience was that we know that people want to be able to have a voice and be able to give their comments when they want. And what's behind that statement was that we had about 1,600 people petition and then do a survey saying they wanted the Beach Cafe reopened. And then as soon as council made that decision, we had probably as equal a number of people then jumping on social media saying, why did council agree to put more money into the Beach Cafe? So quite an interesting dynamic again in terms of when people have their, make their contribution. Kathy?
And just one final comment, certainly in terms of engagement with the community, that is something that we'll have quite a deep dive conversation with members about as well, because it's part of our civic leadership and your civic leadership in terms of how are we engaging with the community, how are we getting the feel and the views of the community into your decision making. So when we have our couple of days workshop, we'll do a bit more of a deep dive into that, and there's different strategies for community engagement. And then just the one last thing on the city psyche, we will be next year working with the University of South Australia to do quite a deep dive into understanding more about what and how the city psyche is shaped at this moment in time, what has actually come to the table and come to the fore in shaping that city psyche. And then what are the things that we can do to actually really leverage from the strengths of the existing psyche, and how do we shift what needs to be shifted as well. So we do have a project scope in the train with University of South Australia to do that next year. The university is very, very excited, and of course all council and council members will be involved in that too.
Okay, thanks, Happy. All right, moving on. So looking to what's on the horizon. Provided a brief synopsis of each of these projects at our first session. We are working with the state government to look at try to set up an information briefing for councillors. At this point in time, I don't think that's likely to occur this side of Christmas. Just time's a bit short, and trying to get 3 or 4 government agencies all together, together with councillors, it's just proving a little bit challenging. So it's likely to be in the new calendar year. As I mentioned at the council meeting last week, we are expecting some announcements from the state government in the very short-term future, within the next week or two. So in relation to the hydrogen jobs plan, the state government is finalising the collateral to be commence their tendering process to engage in a development partner to build the SA hydrogen jobs plan facilities. we anticipate that call, international tender call, will occur either this week or next week at the latest. So that will be quite significant, and probably at around that time, I'm assuming there will be also some public commentary around the option agreements that council has in place with the state government in relation to lands needed for that development. In relation to the Port Bonython hydrogen precinct, Friday week ago was a critical deadline for the 7 companies to confirm their interest in developing around Port Bonython. So we again expect that there will be some announcements from the state government in the not too distant future around who those companies are and what their plans are. And the Northern Water Supply Project is looking to continue to socialise their project, and they met with the mayor on Thursday of last week to provide an update on where they are at with their planning, and attended the shack owners meeting, the Coltana Jenkins Shack Owners Association meeting on Thursday night, which I haven't had anyone loop back to me. Were you at that one by any chance? No. Yeah. So yeah. So each of those 3 projects are progressing well, which is good, and I believe I've got nothing that I can point to tangibly at this point in time, but I believe that the state government, as a collective, are now starting to increase their focus on all of the associated matters beyond just the projects themselves. So things like housing, as an example, the manufacturing opportunities, and the like. There's multiple agencies now calling us on a regular basis, including as recently as today, we had a senior executive from Trade and Investment ringing to make contact about a number of these projects and how they'll impact on our city going forward. Having said all that, probably I'll conclude on this slide by saying that as a council, we've developed what we call the precinct partnership document. It was modelled on the former federal government's city deals and regional deals, and the intent of that partnership proposal was to get a joined up approach from council, state government and the federal government to work together to co-create, co-design and co-invest in the investment in our city over the next 5 or 10 years period. That precinct partnership document, we still believe will serve this council well in terms of some of those conversations, particularly with the state government over the next couple of months. I think with the council elections behind us now, the opportunity for the council, whether it's the council as a collective, if we can get the Premier or Treasurer or Minister for Energy and Mines to come to Whyalla, or if not in Whyalla, the Mayor and Deputy Mayor having the opportunity to meet with the Premier and key ministers around the planning for Whyalla's future. I think within the next couple of months, there will be a real opportunity to really amplify the conversation and the need for a precinct partnership going forward. I think maybe just off as a spur off to that, I just want to share with the councillors that the subject of housing has been an ongoing challenge for this city. It is our Achilles heel in terms of supporting the significant investment, the attraction of major events to our city and the like. In terms of some reality now starting to come into the conversations about, you know, the need to tackle that particular issue in confidence. Liberty One Steel have approached council saying that to meet their own needs currently, before any significant projects come online, and they've got a couple in the making, which we anticipate there may be an announcement within the not too distant future. They need 500 additional beds in our city, and they need them now. So that conversation has been curated to the point where we are now looking at the opportunity to have a residential village, not a miners' camp, a residential village established on the land behind the TAFE SA and the Middleback Arts Centre in the centre of our city. We made it very clear to Liberty One Steel that in terms of workers' accommodation, we didn't want a miners' camp behind barbed wire fence on the steelwork site, as one example. We didn't want a camp on the outskirts of town or out of town. Neither of those two opportunities really are good opportunities to showcase what living and working in Whyalla is like, what the sense of community is within our city, and to get those workers integrated into our community. So we're in discussions at present with TAFE SA to see whether we can secure that land. Those 500 houses, Liberty wants to basically put on the ground between now and May of next year. So again, not long lead times. And the way that they're planning to do that is to have the facilities prefabricated, most likely in China, put on their own ships and brought through their own port. That circumvents a lot of the supply chain issues that many other people have across the country in terms of accessing accommodation reasonably quick time. So that's just one case example. It may not be the best possible outcome for our city, but it is the start and I think the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's coming. So if GFG alone have got a need for 500 beds, what are all the other companies that are wanting to do business in Whyalla's needs going to be, and how do we service those? So we have got a number of plans, including the Pony Club site, which we continue to prosecute to the state government as an ideal development site for residential development. There are other parcels of land around our city, and what I suppose I'm foreshadowing is early in the new calendar year, we need to have a conversation as a council to talk about what are some of those potential solutions or options, noting that our housing topography is across all needs, from aged care through to independent living, retirement village living, over 55s living, through to workers' accommodation, social housing, market accommodation, executive accommodation, short-term stays, long-term stays, pretty much every type of accommodation we've got a need for, and we need to work out how do we then support that investment and development in our city. And invariably, I think we need to get some sort of obviously joined up conversation happening, particularly with the state government and the private sector. And I would like to think the federal government is also a party to some of those discussions in due course. Any questions or comments on any of that? Those state significant projects. I know we're still touching on them superficially, and we're doing that intentionally because I think it's better that each of those projects give a briefing direct to council, so you're getting it straight from, as the old cliche says, the horse's mouth, as opposed to me as an intermediary. I'll go to Mark first, then David.
Justin, do we engage with anybody like that lease cabin park? You seen what they've built in Port Augusta on the Whyalla Road? Well, that's the type of thing that I think, private investment opportunities. They're the sort of people we should be chasing, encouraging, because that is a fantastic facility. We use the cabin park in Port Pirie for our work. It's fantastic. But this facility, if you haven't seen it on the Whyalla Road, it is just outstanding. And I reckon there'd be 60, 70, 80 cabins there, at least minimum, if not more.
Yeah, so that's certainly part of the solution, particularly probably targeted at that workers' accommodation, noting that our current Discovery Park, Caravan Park, down on the foreshore is probably our equivalent of that at present. 95% of the people at that Caravan Park are workers to our city, not visitors. The Discovery Park is landlocked, so the master plan Foreshore Master Plan looks at how do we unlock that and give them the opportunity to expand. And then there are other sites in our city that potentially lend themselves to that sort of short-term cabin park. But having said that, we've got some of that stock already. Sundowner, for example, is an example. Yes, we need more of that, but what we do need more of is the established, housing that encourages people to stay here permanently, as opposed to that sort of short, medium-term stay. So it's got to be a combination of different solutions for the different housing needs that we've got in front of us. David, did you?
I was going to ask, you mentioned on Thursday night about the electric arc furnace. Do we have any definitive idea when that might be announced?
Depends on how definitive is. I'm expecting that there will be some announcements within a matter of weeks, not months. Peter?
Just a quick question. When you say the prefab coming through to solve the immediate problem, what, if we can in this discussion here, what's an ideal end game solution? I mean, you sort of touched on it then just briefly. Is it permanent housing? Is it a private developer that goes, wow, so much housing, I can build that and rent it out and sell it and make a profit? Is it government? Is it a combination of those two things? You mentioned some sites where they could be. Is this like a new housing estate? The thought that crossed my head is like prefab in a location. Does that then just encourage more of that? And it's very much transient, not that architecturally lovely. What's the perfect sort of solution that sort of council can envision?
Yeah, it's a combination of all of the above. Noting that we'll have short, medium, and longer term housing needs that we need to tackle, and to be brutally honest, we're coming from a pretty low base. A lot of the housing stock we've got is a lot of the housing stock is old and tired and probably not really fit for purpose in terms of the contemporary housing needs. So it will be a mix of all of those. The conversation we need to have with council is what type of development do we want on which sites across the city? How do we ultimately want the city to evolve? Importantly, how do we sort of triage the different housing projects to deliver multiple solutions over those short, medium, longer term? Sorry, that was probably a pretty cryptic response to say it's quite a complex scenario. In part, the private sector and the state government will be the sort of two key players in terms of driving some of those conversations, maybe the federal government in terms of some funding. But I think council's invariably got a role in terms of playing, in terms of what type of housing do we want where and how do we facilitate it. If I can say, because there will be a temptation to do this, our foreshore precinct area, we could probably get some affordable accommodation put down on our foreshore very quickly. I would suggest that short-term workers' accommodation on our foreshore is not the highest and best use of the prime real estate in our city, but there could be a temptation to do that. So it's about council as a group having a conversation about how you want the city to evolve, and noting that that evolution will have to potentially sort of be a staged approach. But it won't be one housing development, it will be multiple, and there will be multiple different players and different housing products that can be derived from those various projects. The challenge that we have as a council is that we've got limited resources, and we're not property developers. Some of us may think we're sort of, not. Maybe I'll look in my own direction. Some of us think we know a little bit about property development, but we're not property developers, so we really need to engage someone who can actually curate some of those projects, package them up, put them to market in a way, or actually go and approach the market. It may not be, an EOI process. It could be a direct approach. So there'll be a mix of different opportunities, I think, that council will need to consider over the next few years. If we move off of the state context back to sort of regional and local, so The graphic on the left-hand side shows that we are one of 68 councils across the state. As a consequence of that, we are part of the LGA. So the graphic on the top right-hand side is the from the LGA in terms of some of its core pillars of its work. So we work in both the Spencer Gulf region. So the document in the middle there is the Spencer Gulf Cities Regional Partnership Priorities that was developed very recently. So leading up to the state government election, that document was put together. We had members from all three councils come together to workshop those priorities and to help provide input and shape those priorities. Those priorities were then road tested with two other workshops, one being business and industry and the other one being sort of community and government not-for-profit groups. So some good engagement across the region in terms of what those priorities are. That was then put to all the politicians leading up to the state election and currently represents the strategic priorities for the Spencer Gulf cities. Currently, our mayor and deputy mayor are members and proxy member for the Spencer Gulf City. We have the first meeting of the Spencer Gulf Cities post-election tomorrow. And for the benefit of councillors, what we do is we send a copy of the agendas for all of the meetings and then subsequently the minutes. And whoever attends the meeting could use the update to council as a forum to provide council with an update regarding some of the discussions happening, whether it's at Spencer Gulf Cities or in terms of the graphic on the bottom right-hand side, the Eyre Peninsula councils. So there's 10 other councils plus Whyalla making up the Eyre Peninsula. So we have an interesting scenario that Whyalla has actually got a foot in 2 regional local government areas. That's reasonably unique in South Australia. Most councils are in 1 region, not 2. Within the Spencer Gulf cities, it proves to be a little bit more interesting in that each of the 3 cities are in a separate planning zone for state planning legislation. So from a state planning legislation, we're part of the EP region. Port Augusta is part of the northern regions and outback regions area. And Port Pirie is part of the York and something else. Mid-North. Thank you. So separate planning zones and each in a separate RDA zone as well. The other 2 councils are members of their RDA. Our council's currently not a member of the EP RDA, and that's a subject that we will bring back to the table for some further discussion in due course. So on a regional level, we contribute to both Spencer Gulf and the Eyre Peninsula LGAs. Through those 2 LGAs, as entities in their own right, they can nominate people to what's called SAROC, which is a South Australian region of South Australian region organisation regional councils. Sorry. So all of the non-metro councils are part of one subgroup of the LGA. All the metro councils are part of GAYROC, which is a separate sub-entity under the LGA. And then those 2 subgroups can then make nominations for elected members to the board of the LGA. So there's essentially 3 levels of hierarchy: LGA, SAROC, GAYROC, and then the regional LGAs. Our mayor is currently a member of both the regions regional LGAs, and the deputy mayor is the proxy. And with Mayor Brett Bembo from Port Augusta not winning the election, there will be tomorrow a discussion at the Spencer Gulf Cities about who to nominate to SAROC to replace Mayor Bembo as the Spencer Gulf City representative, in addition to Mayor Leon Stevens, who is a member and an ongoing member who was recently or previously appointed. So there's a little bit about the hierarchy. Any questions about the hierarchy? Then at a more local level, we then have a number of other groups that work within our city. So we have the Whyalla Services Leadership Group. So that's currently led by SAPOL. They chair that group. It's all of the service agencies that are typically supporting the more vulnerable people within our community. So the likes of SAHA, Department of Child Protection, some of the drug and alcohol and domestic violence service providers in the city, some Indigenous health providers, ambulance, and the like. So all of those, the services group, they meet every roughly 2 months from memory, and the mayor and myself attend that group, and yeah, so that's that group. And then we have the Whyalla Business and Tourism, which some of the people around this table are very familiar with. So that's the new entity that was created from the merger of the former Chamber of Commerce and the Whyalla Tourism Focus Group. Hopefully all of you around the table will be aware that the council about 18 months ago entered into a tri-party agreement with Whyalla Business and Tourism as well as Business SA to provide support and services to our local business community. And if I reflect on the recent AGM and awards night, not AGM, the recent awards night for Whyalla Business and Tourism, where there was 225 people and a fantastic vibe in the room. I reflect on this year's event to 2 years ago when the very first event I attended as the CEO, quite a different vibe and certainly a much significant increase in the number of people there. So I think that's testament to that investment starting to have some payoffs in terms of building that sense of community within the business community. And then we have the Northern Hospital Advisory Group, which council, under their charter, council is asked to nominate someone to that advisory group. So as I understand, it's not a decision-making group, it's an advisory group to the Northern Hospital Local Area Health Network. I've probably got the anagram wrong, that's close enough. And our current delegate for that group is Councillor Westerman, I think. Is that right? Yep, Councillor Westerman. Yeah, thank you. So they're just three, and then there's other groups locally that I'm sure many of you are aware of as well. Any questions or comments on any of those? If not, I'm now going to hand over to Kathy to talk about framework. Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks, Justin. If I could just mention to members that this part of tonight's session is part of the mandatory training requirements for council members. So we'll be looking at the integrated strategic management planning. And as part of that, I've got Sue King here and also Grant. And both Sue and Grant will sort of come in and out of this presentation. But before we actually move into the actual strategic planning part of it, we are also wanting to brief council on the CEO's employment agreement and performance review process, which is why Sue is here. We do have our independent advisor to the council also online to participate in this session, and that's Felicity Lewis. Are you there, Felicity?
Yes, I am. I'm not sure why my camera's not working.
We'll fix that though. That's okay. Thank you, Felicity. And Felicity is appointed under a contract, and Sue will go through that. We were planning on doing a number of slides before this portion of it, but I'm going to skip forward so that Felicity's time is well used. And over to Sue.
Thank you, Kathy. Just in terms of the CEO's employment contract, the CEO is engaged on a 5-year contract with an expiry date of the 10th of October 2025. All of the terms and conditions of employment for the CEO are set out in this employment agreement, including the total employment cost, also known as a TEC, which is the monetary and non-monetary component of the agreement. The CEO's performance review is a requirement under the Local Government Act 1999, and the reviews are conducted in accordance with an adopted executive performance management framework. The Mayor and the Deputy Mayor form the CEO review panel, and it's guided by our independent advisor, Felicity Ann Lewis, and supported by the Manager of People and Culture. The appointment of Felicity is a requirement under Section 102A of the Local Government Act. So in line with the Executive Performance Framework, the CEO Review Panel will meet twice yearly to conduct the mid-year and end-of-year review of the Chief Executive Officer. At the mid-year review, the review panel reviews the progress against the CEO's KPIs and confirms the process for the end-of-year review and reports back to Council. At the end of the review panel considers and reviews the CE's progress against the KPIs, review 360-degree feedback from internal and external stakeholders, sets the CEO KPIs aligned to the annual business plan and budget for the following year, determine if there will be any amendments to the CEO employment agreement, and will report back to Council to adopt KPIs and make any resolutions regarding the CEO's employment agreement. As we have said, we have Felicity Ann Lewis, who is the independent advisor under the Act, and Felicity is going to give Council a brief bio of her employment and her experience. Thanks, Felicity.
Thanks, Sue, and good evening, everybody. I still haven't got my camera able to turn on, so I'm not sure if that's my end or your end, but I know a number of you have already met me, and so you already know what I look like. But those of you who haven't, I look forward to seeing you at some stage into the future. I can see you on the screen. I just want to start by congratulating you all on your election. Very exciting, and congratulations, Phil, to you in securing the role of Mayor. And I believe Councillor Pond is the deputy. Is that right? Yes. Yep. So those two people will, as Sue's already outlined, make up the CEO review panel along with myself and with support from the staff. For those of you who I haven't met and who don't know me, I have had a long history in local government. I was an elected member at the City of Marion for 17.5 years, 14.5 of those as Mayor. I also held the position of President of the Local Government Association and also the President of the Australian Local Government Association during my time in local government. In my professional life, I'm a Doctor of Education, and I've worked at Flinders University for 17 years as Senior Lecturer in the School of Education. So I'm currently the director of my own business called Felicity Ann Lewis Leading Learning, because those two things capture my passion in assisting people in leadership and learning about leading. So those sort of two things gel nicely for me. And I have undertaken a number of contracts since I retired from Flinders University a couple of years ago, working with councils. I've done a couple of contracts with the Katherine Town Council in the Northern Territory and with Victor Harbour. I recently spent a couple of days with the new Victor Harbour Council on their induction program, and have been employed to undertake their behaviour standards training in early January. So I've been, I guess, following up with my passion in helping councils be the best they possibly can be, because the better the council is, the more functional they are, the more they can achieve for their communities. So that's really where I come from, and my involvement with Whyalla Council began a couple of years ago when I was employed to do a weekend workshop with the previous council in trying to hone down some of the challenges, what they were calling the legacy issues that council had, to try and refine that list and talk about prioritising that and trying to get that into some sort of shape when Justin came into the role as CEO. So that was my first engagement with the council, and then I've subsequently, as you've heard, was employed to work with the council to develop the first set of key performance indicators for Justin as a result of his contract. And so we did a process at the end of the year before this, in November in 2021, developed those KPIs, and Justin has prepared a report against those in the first quarter of this year. And then we conducted a comprehensive 360 degree CEO review using external stakeholders, staff, and the elected members. And a number of you, obviously, that are returning onto council were part of that feedback for Justin, from which I developed with the panel a comprehensive review of what was said, areas that were obviously going well, things to work on for the future. And that's what Justin has been working with in those three areas, with the external community members and the issues in the community, with the staff feedback, and with elected member feedback. So the next part of the process is we're about to do the mid-year review, because the year ends at the end of the financial year. So just to clarify that, it's not the end of the calendar year. So we're about to move into that. So the first business of the new panel will be to work together to look at how Justin believes he's tracking against his KPIs, and in response to the feedback that was given to him back in August at the conclusion of his review. So that's where we're currently at. I guess unless there's anything else that people would like some clarification on, I'm more than happy to take questions on that. That's just a bit of a snapshot about me and how we'll be working forward in the next few months on the mid-year review. Thanks, Sue.
Thanks, Felicity. As part of the pack that you would have received tonight, you'll see the Executive Performance Management Framework. So that guides through the process that we work with Felicity, the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor, in working with Justin in where he is at in respect to his key performance indicators and his development plan. Also in the briefing, we provided a bit of an outline of the work that Felicity and Lewis has been engaged to perform. So you can see the process that she will follow through. As Felicity has said, we're about to embark on the mid-year review, and we anticipate having that first meeting of the review panel take place around the 6th of February, with a report back to council by the 16th of February 2023. As you'll see on the screen, the CEO KPIs for 1st of July 2022 to the 30th of June 2023. These are aligned to the annual business plan. So for those that have familiarised themselves with that document, these will seem quite familiar. And these are the KPIs that Justin will be tracked against and report to the review panel. Yeah. Thanks, Justin.
Does anybody have any questions in terms of that process? I think it's fair to say that one of the most important roles of a council or of a governing body is the ongoing relationship with the Chief Executive Officer and the annual performance review process. And so it is really a key element of governance in any organisation, and councils are no different. The council, as the governing body of the organisation, is the body that is responsible to manage the performance of the Chief Executive Officer, and that flows down then from the Chief Executive Officer to Kristen, Jade and myself. So these KPIs, Justin cascades those down to the three of us, and then we cascade them throughout the organisation. The Executive Performance Management Framework applies just as equally to Kristen, Jade and myself as well in terms of annual performance reviews and mid-year reviews. So there is quite a sophisticated, I'll call it management system in place within the organisation to really designed to ensure that what Justin does and then what Jade, Kristen and I do are aligned to the objectives of the council, so that we don't go off and do our own thing and sort of run away with the pixies. But yes, there's there is a framework in place that assures that real alignment, and that goes and flows down through the rest of the organisation, which basically ensures that all of the resources of the organisation are aligned with the direction of the council. One thing that I will say in this sort of a system, one of the other parts of it is then to, and we will have a conversation with the council a bit later in 2023 around how is the council itself actually looking at its own performance and how it's working and how is it aligned with the systems that we've got in place. And so we'd be keen to have a conversation with the council as a whole, because it is a very recognised approach to, for the governing body to be looking at the way it's working itself as well. So we will be looking to do that. But it is one of the most important things that a council can do, and that is the ongoing performance management of the CEO. Sue mentioned that there are provisions in the Local Government Act which requires this type of approach. It is part of the legislative reforms that it has been introduced that an independent advisor must be engaged to assist and advise the council in these processes. So that's not an option. You must engage a person that you think is qualified in order to do that role. And secondly, the government has brought in another reform in relation to the setting of the Chief Executive Officer's remuneration for councils, and that is the remuneration tribunal that reviews council members' remuneration is also now tasked with setting the remuneration of Chief Executive Officers in local government. So Justin's remuneration has been set by this council. Given he's under an existing employment agreement, the rulings of the Remuneration Tribunal won't apply to Justin, but any new Chief Executive Officer that comes in local government in South Australia from now, their remuneration will be set by the determination of the Remuneration Tribunal.
That's what's happened this year.
Yes, it's part of the reforms. It's new, so yes, it's just happened this year. Yep. So it's taken it out of the hands of the councils, basically, in terms of setting the remuneration of Chief Executive Officers, but it's not applied to existing Chief Executive Officers under the contracts.
Can I just? Sorry, go on, Justin.
What is the value of the tribunal setting?
We don't have the first determination yet of the Remuneration Tribunal for CEOs. We are eagerly awaiting that as a sector, but we don't have it yet.
If I can add just before you speak, Felicity, unlike the elected members' allowances, where the tribunal actually determines a figure, in the case of CEOs, what they'll do is they'll determine ranges or bands for the different CEOs, depending on what size and what type of council the CEO operates in. So across the 68 councils, there's a banding of councils. So the really large councils like Onkaringa and Playford are considered band 1.
There's multiple groups, about 6 of them.
Yep. So band 1, so just in terms of the scaling, so the really big councils, band 1, Whyalla is midpoint, so we're a band 3. So we're together with the likes of Burnside, Mitcham,
Port Lincoln,
Yep.
Port Augusta,
Yep.
Mount Gambier, Murray Bridge,
Yep.
etc.
Yeah, and then band 5, I think it's the lowest band, or is that 6? Is like the really small councils. So whilst the remuneration panel will determine the bands, it will still be up to then council to decide where within that band the CEO remuneration will be pegged. Over to you, Felicity.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. I just wanted to say, look, I know that probably for the new elected members, it's information overload, but just hang in there. Christmas is only a couple of weeks away, so you get a bit of a chance just to ruminate a little bit and digest it. And don't fear, because many of these things will come back to you a number of times, and eventually, when you've read things 3 or 4 times, you'll start to understand how it all works. So don't be too hard on yourself. But I just wanted to say that for those elected members who are on the 2nd or 3rd time around, that the review that we did in August of this year for Justin, the feedback that was given by each of the groups, but I'll just focus on the elected members at the moment, was that for some people, they were concerned, some elected members were concerned that they didn't have enough explicit understanding of what the CEO actually did. And so for a number of the questions, they answered not applicable or not enough information or something like that. When obviously the governance tool does assume, as the manager, and he's your one employee, that you would have a good understanding of the whole role of the CEO. Now, obviously, that's easier said than done. So the staff certainly are aware that you will need to be given opportunities to be for Justin to demonstrate and to show how he's performing in some of those areas where people felt it was less line of sight for them to actually be able to make a fair comment. So please just know that, you know, we've listened to what you've said, and the staff will are very cognizant of that, and they will make sure that by the time you come to fill the next survey out, hopefully, that there will be some improvement around how people feel they can actually undertake that survey. And that also goes for the staff. There was some feedback from them as well, so we will do some, on the basis of that, some minor alterations to how some of that is done. So we've certainly listened, and obviously that's my job, is to make suggestions along with the panel how we can make sure this gives Justin the best information he can possibly have about how he's performing, so that you can get the best function out of the organisation. Thank you.
Any questions?
If I could just draw, when you're going back through your pack, draw attention to table 1 in the Executive Performance Management Framework. That's actually the guide that we've used to do the 360-degree feedback. So if you could, over a period of time, start to familiarise yourself with those questions. Those are the questions that are being asked of elected members and staff and external stakeholders. So that will help, I guess, inform and guide you in the relationship that you have with the CEO.
That's the same question we had last year.
They are, yes.
I got some of those questions last year. I think a couple of people agreed it needed clarification, but it's very direct enough or informative enough.
Mm-hmm.
Plus the answers saying, not sure.
Yeah. We're certainly looking at that from a construct point of view to, you know, ensure that the questions are constructed in a way that you are able to answer. Yeah.
Good question, Sue. Was that in this book, in the handbook? Where was table 1?
It was in the papers that came out for this briefing session. So yes, yeah,
on the LG Hub.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yep,
Is
so
that
the agenda that was forwarded out for this
Yep.
meeting,
for the briefing session?
yes, for the
Probably
briefing
here.
session has those papers attached.
And that would like be an annexure down the bottom?
Yes, correct.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Felicity.
Thank you.
Attending. Thank
No
you.
worries. And season's greetings to everybody. You have a much deserved break in the next couple of weeks.
All the best,
So
Felicity.
thank you. Thanks very much. I'll look forward to working with you in the new year. Bye.
Thanks, Felicity. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So back at the beginning, this is about
Excuse me,
integrated
I just have a
strategic.
question.
Sorry,
Kathy.
Peter, yes.
Just in terms of the agreement, Justin's agreement, on page 61, there's a clause about the council agrees to recognise his prior long service
Yes,
with the local government.
yes.
What kind of liability do we incur as a council for that? Is there any extra liability for us?
No, no extra liability.
How does that work then?
It is purely and simply accruals. So there were no carryover of leave balances at all, or no liabilities carried over. It is simply that the Chief Executive Officer is now accruing at the rate which is around the years of service that he has provided to local government. Welcome. As I said, this is part of the suite of mandatory training. Integrated strategic management planning is part of the standards that have been adopted by government and by the industry. What we're going to go through is a bit about what is Whyalla's integrated strategic management planning, what's the purpose of strategic financial asset management planning, how and where does annual business planning and budgeting fit into it all, and what's the legislative and policy requirements that sit around community engagement and performance reporting, and how do we as a council and how are we proposing to do that as well. So we'll go through that, have a bit of a conversation. We've mentioned community engagement already a little bit today, and we will do a deeper dive into that a bit later, not tonight, but we will reference it. This slide, starting at the on the right hand side where it talks about public value, or where the visual of public value is, that's what we're all about. So it's about public value creation. All of the services that council provides, all of the engagement with the community, anything and everything that we do is with the view to achieving and delivering public value to the Whyalla community. How do we know what public value is? That's the holy grail question in terms of, how do we know it? What is it? We understand that through community feedback and through engaging the community to know what it is their expectations are of service levels, etc., and whether or not we are delivering those services in a way that is actually meeting their needs. Community feedback occurs at a strategic level when we're doing strategic planning and annual business planning, but it also occurs at a project level. So the foreshore development of the foreshore master plan used significant community engagement to gather the ideas of the community in terms of what they wanted out of the foreshore. The foreshore cafe was a form of community engagement when the community was really rising up and telling us what they wanted. So we did quite a lot of community engagement there. So it happens at multiple levels across the organisation. Let's say, for example, that Kristen's team needed to significantly prune or change the trees in a particular street. And if there were quite a number of trees that needed to be pulled out under the Local Government Act, we would need to do community engagement around that body of work. So it happens at lots of different levels. But community engagement is part of our strategic management planning and framework. The feedback comes from the community basically into the chamber then, It comes to the community, or it comes from the community into the chamber. You take note of what feedback is actually being provided by the community, and then you make your decisions as to what it is that you want to do. Another example is a community engagement that was undertaken on dogs on the foreshore, dogs on leash or off leash on the foreshore over a period of time. We did some community engagement. The outcome of that community engagement came into this council as part of a council report for a decision in terms of where that when dogs were to be on leash or off leash on the foreshore and at what times. So you made the decision, you passed a resolution, and that then provided an instruction to the Chief Executive Officer as to how to implement it. We've already talked about Justin's employment agreement and performance review process. So that arrow on the left-hand side from the picture of the elected body coming down into the picture of the organisation, that's to represent the relationship between you as the elected body and Justin as the Chief Executive Officer. It's the key relationship of a council. From a governance perspective, your relationship with the Chief Executive Officer will define and result in, or could result in, absolutely brilliant outcomes being achieved, because it's a relationship which is constructive and has a potential positive or constructive tension in it. So you've got a relationship with the Chief Executive Officer that is positive, but it is also one about managing his performance. So there's a constructive tension in that relationship to ensure that activities actually get done. And of course, it goes both ways. So the CEO needs to give feedback through to the council body as to whether or not a particular decision is going to be able to be resourced and delivered appropriately and in line with meeting public value. Justin's role then as CEO is to make sure that the organisation has the operational capabilities and the systems and processes and culture to deliver on your decisions and deliver all of the services. And we do that through the organisation has adopted the values of we are committed, we care, we work together, we own it. Those values are measured on a very regular basis, and we do work to understand how it is that we can influence the culture and move into a culture which is allowing the staff and empowering the staff to actually deliver on the objectives of the council. And those services are then delivered. Experiences for the community in terms of how they receive those services. That customer experience then comes back up into feedback, and it goes and contributes to public value. So that's the cycle. It starts and ends with the community. It starts with the community letting us know and giving us feedback about their expectations and their needs for services and how the council works. The council then does its job. The CEO and the organisation does its job, delivering in that customer service or customer experience. We get feedback and it keeps going through. You would assume that there are continuous improvement loops actually built into that, and that becomes our framework. That shows how there is an integration between the community, the elected body making decisions, the organisation implementing the decisions of the council, and then delivering the service to the community again. Those boxes in the middle is the strategic planning framework itself. So we can have all sorts of conversations with the community, but if we don't actually commit it to plans and then understand how the resources get aligned and assigned to the different activities, we've got no hope in terms of delivering on the community needs and expectations. So we do need to commit them to plans. And so those, before I move to that, as I said at the beginning, community feedback comes through. What we have been doing over the last couple of years is to undertake an annual community survey to understand what the community perceptions are of the services delivered by council. This survey is usually done in enough time that the outcomes of this survey feeds into the council's annual business plan and budget process, and that helps with the annual business plan and budget process to, as a filter to check that we are aligning the resources in the areas that the community is saying that we need to align our resources. So we haven't done this survey this year yet. Reason being because of the council elections that were being held. We would generally undertake the survey in October, get the feedback through in October coming into November, December, but we have delayed it as a result of the elections. And Grant, I understand it's happening shortly?
Yeah, we'll be planning to do that in the near future.
Sorry?
We'll be planning to do that in the near
Yes.
future. Yeah.
Yeah, so within the coming weeks, we will be planning to do that. Coming back to this integrated strategic management framework itself, I previously flagged with you and in your booklets the current strategic plan. We are planning on retiring that current strategic plan, certainly taking from it in terms of what are the good things and what are the strengths of it. But we are planning on going out to the community with a significant community engagement program to understand what the community's vision is now, and then developing a community plan which will have a 10 to 20 year horizon, and that community plan will be developed with the community, by the community, for the community, focusing on those 5 areas being well-being, economy, environment, structure and leadership. What structure is there? It's not the structure of the organisation, it's the structure of the city. So how does the city work? Where are the transport routes? Where are the recreation zones? Where are the employment zones? Where are the education zones, etc.? So that's about the structure of our city, not the structure of the organisation. That plan then will inform the council's actual strategic plan. So coming back to the community plan, any member of the community, whether it be a private organisation, whether it be a state government agency, a federal agency, anybody will be able to refer back to the community plan and work on what is it that they are doing as an organisation that contributes to the Whyalla community and the vision that the Whyalla community has articulated in that community plan. So it could be beyond bank, besides that they look at this community plan and they see the community vision being X, Y, Z, and then the beyond bank decides, okay, well, these sorts of products or this sort of service offering might well actually be useful in terms of the Whyalla community. So then the council strategic plan is a 10-year horizon, again, focused on wellbeing, economy, environment, structure and leadership, but it's about what is our contribution to the community vision, to the community plan. And that is high-level statements, high-level strategies under which then the council decides that it wants to focus on. And then that provides guidance for Justin in terms of the resourcing of the organisation and aligning the resourcing of the organisation along those areas. That then flows down into specific delivery plans, which will have a 4-year horizon. I want to focus over on the right-hand side where we talk about resource plans. They're of a 10-year horizon. And a number of those, or 2 of those in particular, are required under the Local Government Act as plans that the council must adopt. They are the long-term financial plan and the infrastructure and asset management plans. To talk about those and how they integrate into this system, I'm going to hand over to Grant. Thanks, Grant.
Thanks, Kathy. So as Kathy has mentioned already, alongside the strategic plan, the long-term financial plan and the infrastructure and asset management plan make up what are called council's strategic management plans. So they're defined in the Act and need to be adopted by council. And so they have to be adopted in each new term of council and within 2 years of the election. So basically council have to undertake a full review or start from scratch with those plans and adopt them by at the latest November 2024. And so basically the way it works is the the infrastructure and asset management plan sets out, in effect, the service levels that we expect to get from our assets. And so local government, as most governments are, but especially local government, very asset intensive. Local governments look after a lot of the assets in Australia with not much income. So asset management plans are very important for us because they drive a lot of our costs. And if we don't managing them correctly, costs can get out of hand, or you can get those backlogs where you're not actually spending the money you should on your assets. So they set out service levels, basically intervention levels, those sorts of things, and they're highly data driven. So we collect a lot of data that feeds into our asset management plans, basically on a 5-yearly cycle across our main asset classes. And so what it really comes down to is they're not just things that are numbers or figures picked out of nowhere. They're actually, data driven, and it means that we can make decisions based upon that are less subjective. And I guess what we tend to say as well is when we get towards the budgeting end of things, a bit further down, we tend to say that the renewal of our assets, which is what comes out of our asset management plans, is something that we shouldn't be, moving around too much or changing. We should be, relying on the data, obviously ground truthing, that sort of thing. But yeah, that renewal should be one of the things that we do when it's due, so that we're not increasing our costs in the long run and getting backlogs and those sorts of things. So the asset management plans will feed through for our big asset classes: transport, buildings, open space. They're sort of, and we sort of have a couple of other ones, irrigation plant, that sort of thing. But they drive a big percentage of council's costs and are a big driver of what we do as an organisation. And then that feeds into the other plan that we need to develop, which is our long-term financial plan. And one of the rules actually is within the Act is that your asset management plans actually have to be consistent with your long-term financial plans. So what used to tend to happen in the past, councils would develop an asset management plan with all their figures of what renewal they should be doing, and then they produce the long-term financial plan, and none of the figures in the renewal section would look anything like the asset management plan. And so the Act specifically outlines that they need to be consistent, and that's actually one of the things that ASCOSA will be looking at when they do their 4-yearly review of each council that has just started as part of the local government reforms. That's actually one of the key outcomes of that. And so when the development of our long-term financial plan, so basically our long-term financial plan is our funding plan, and it's when we develop it each time, I think, we develop it from the ground up, where it looks at what do we already do as a council, and we build it around the assumptions, some key assumptions, things normally like that we'll have a continuation of service levels, that we will fully fund renewal as we are required to do, and then we look at what capacity we might have for new services or for new assets. One of the key concerns and I guess the constraints we've had as a city for a long time is that we've had zero growth for probably 10 years. And so growth, a little bit of growth can be a key thing for delivering new services or increased services or more assets to a council area. Whereas this council has had to live with for a long time that if we want something new, the existing ratepayers have to pay for it. And so we often, as we build our long-term financial plan, we'll build in a bit of capacity. But what that means is we'll tend to have a rate increase that's above CPI to fund that. And so really the building of the long-term financial plan is looking at that balance, I guess, for us around affordability. And one of we've talked very quickly about, we have some, we're in a deficit position and our sustainability, is a discussion point. I guess that part of that is the fact that we've wanted to invest in our city when we've had no growth, and that some of that growth might be coming through, but isn't built into the plan currently. So yeah, I guess the long-term financial plan really should be pulling together all of the other plans and showing how we can fund the asset management plan and our strategic plan. It should be building in, for the things that we want to be delivering in those other plans. Yeah.
Thank you, Grant. There are two other plans there as resource plans that feed into the overarching plans. One is workforce plan and the other one IT plan. Sue, do you want to make any comments?
In terms of planning, we are on a journey to develop a workforce plan. We need to position ourselves for possible growth in different types of positions the council may need going forward. We also need to do some work around our ageing workforce. We have developed a career pathways plan which will see our increase intake of school-based trainees and graduates over the coming years. But in terms of having a better down workforce plan, we are just starting on that cycle.
Thanks, Sue. And similarly, in terms of the IT plan, again, we're on a journey. The IT systems here within this organisation are one of the legacy matters that we are currently working through. We've got a project which is underway at the moment called Systems Modernisation, and that project is at a stage where it's looking at what's the current state of our systems and what are the options that we might have moving forward in terms of modernising. That systems modernisation first report should be with us in around February next year, and we're hopeful that that will then provide us with a roadmap in terms of modernising our systems and changing how we do our work, bringing to the table quite some significant efficiency gains in terms of doing our work. So as you can see, this is a system which is looking at vision at the high level from a community perspective and then bringing down to ever degrees of greater detail in order to inform the resourcing and the delivery of services as it moves on. There are many different plans. There are different sub-plans that will form part of this system. I'm not going to go into them now. They will come to you over the course of the council as we develop and refine this. But it's suffice to say that in terms of operational plans, the annual business plan and budget is one of the most important documents that comes to council for adoption after significant community engagement. And that annual business plan and budget process will be starting with the first report that comes to council next Monday with some details about the process we're planning on adopting and various budget parameters, but I'll come back to that shortly. We do have a 4-year planning cycle. I'm not going to go into this in any detail. It is in your packs, in the induction pack that was provided to you, but you can see there that we will be undertaking quite some community engagement in the development of the community plan in the first instance. And whilst we're doing that, we will be developing the annual business plan and budget for 23-24 because business does need to continue as we're developing the vision. We've also built into our strategic management framework the ability to undertake or develop and undertake a service review program. So our aim is over the course of the 4-year term of council that all of our services will at one point be reviewed so that we can have a look at what are the service levels that need to be or that are looking to be delivered, what are the cost metrics that it is taking, the resource metrics that it's taking in order to deliver those services, and where are the opportunities for either upscaling the service or improving the service in a way that the community is then receiving where the service is matching expectations. So we are currently developing that program of service reviews, and that program of service reviews will come to you in the first quarter next year. And of course, during the course of planning, we have the ongoing delivery of business unit plans, key performance indicators, as you've seen cascaded down from the Chief Executive Officer, and performance reporting and risk management and internal and external oversight. It all happens as a matter of course through the system, and it's built in. As I mentioned, budget parameters. So next week, a report will be on the agenda. These budget parameters have been carried over from the last year. We will discuss these in detail at the council meeting, but they're designed to ensure that there is a degree of stability with our annual business plan and budgeting, and to ensure that we're actually continuing to meet community needs. Grant, is there anything you want to highlight from those parameters?
I think obviously one of the key ones in there is talking about our full funding of our asset management in line with our requirements under the Act. I guess some of the other ones in there are, we do have an assumption around that current service levels continue unless there's a council resolution or something else of similar that drives that change in service level, especially around reductions. I guess one of our big things that we build our long-term financial plan on as well is around predictability and stability in rating increases. So we always peg it. We'll build our long-term financial plan around a CPI plus X% rate increase. We try and maintain that as much as possible each year so that there's not sort of wild fluctuations, from year to year in rating increases. So these are mainly the budget parameters we've used for the last 2 years. We did tweak them a little bit, just some of the wording, but they're sort of the 7 sort of key areas we build around. And one of the things I guess for us, the challenge at the moment is that we're not sort of meeting that the one around a break-even operating position in the middle of the long-term financial plan currently. We know that, and council, when they adopted the plan last year, they recognised and noted that. That's one of those things where, as I said, we've got some potential upside risks, some potential good things coming from an income point of view, but because we don't know the timing, or we haven't known the timing, we haven't built them into our plan yet, from sort of being prudent with our financial planning.
Thank you, Graham.
Any questions from councillors in relation to any of those assumptions that you want to talk about? As Kathy said, we've got that slated for the council meeting next week. But is there any questions or comments on any of those? No, that's all right. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you. This is setting out, and again, it's in the report that is going to be presented at next week's council meeting, is the time frame for the annual business plan and budget for 23-24. We will be doing a significant consultation process in terms of the annual business plan and budget. The approach adopted by this council in terms of consultation or engagement is to really engage the community in the conversation about the objectives that we're seeking to achieve on an annual basis, and also therefore the rates that need to be charged in order to actually deliver on those objectives. The approaches of engagement have included that we go out with a community survey, we hold a couple of public information sessions, we also hold 2 focus group sessions which are attended by a group of randomly selected residents that are demographically across or representing the demographics of the city. So young people, people who own, people who rent, people who have been here for a shorter period of time, people who have been here for a longer period of time. So we do look to get a cross-section of the demographics from the city in terms of those focus groups. We seek the assistance of a community engagement specialist to source those representatives for us so that it is a true random selection of community members at those focus groups. There is then the opportunity for members of the community to make written submissions and also come and speak at a council meeting during the process. So the annual business plan and budget is informed by a significant community engagement process, which is great, and it allows then the members to understand what the community is saying and then make an informed decision on the basis of what the community, what feedback is coming through from the community on the one hand, and then on the other hand, what the resource availability of the council is in order to deliver. So that is a time frame that we will be expecting the annual business plan and budget to come through next year. And for those community engagement sessions and workshops, etc., we'll get those dates in everybody's diaries for you to be in attendance at those. Part of integrated strategic management is reporting. So if you think about the role of the council in 5 different areas, first of all is setting of strategy, which we've talked about. The second part of a role of a governing body or a council is setting the policy. So you set the policy position in order for the organisation to do its work and to deliver on the objectives. You then need to monitor performance. So how is the organisation going against delivering on those objectives? And then you need to be accountable out to the community as to whether you've achieved them or not. So reporting out into the community is part of the accountability piece. The 5th role of the council is what we've already talked about, and that is the management of the Chief Executive Officer as your only employee. But coming back to accountability, this is linked to the key performance indicators that the council set as part of the annual business plan and budget process, and we report against these key performance indicators in the annual report of the council, which you would have seen at the last council meeting, and we also report a half-yearly report out to the community, and that comes into the council at the February council meeting. So we do a half-yearly report against our KPIs, and we do an annual report against the KPIs as reporting coming back into the community, which is then showing how we are delivering against the objectives that were set. Plenty of other reporting occurs as well. There's quarterly budget reviews and reporting that comes through public council meetings. There are the monthly reports that are now coming through to council, which are the activity reports from across the organisation. So each of these reports are actually designed to show not only the elected body that progress is being tracked against the objectives of the organisation, but also reporting out to the community, given these reports are all public reports. We've talked about the reporting element now, but community engagement, we've talked about that as well up front. You'll recall that we've got the community engagement at the beginning of the process and then community feedback at the end of the process. That creates a closed loop of feedback that we operate within. Under the Local Government Act, there is a requirement that the Minister sets a community engagement charter. This is one of the reforms that have just come in under the Local Government Act. Previously, it was simply that Council had to have what was called a public consultation policy. This has been shifted now to an element and to a process of engagement as opposed to just consultation. And the difference in those two words suggests that it's now a two-way conversation as opposed to simply us consulting or informing the community. So the change is a very deliberate shift, that it is about a two-way conversation between the council and the community in terms of the setting of the objectives of the council and the way that ratepayers' money is used. So the Local Government Act has been updated whereby a community engagement charter is being set down by the Minister, and then once that is actually set down, council must have a community engagement policy. Now, these provisions are in the Local Government Act but are not yet started, and councils, there's a bit of a moratorium period for this process to actually be started within local government. Our preference is that we do want to actually move to, well, we're already in really a process of engagement. We have always in the engagement that we've done gone above and beyond the consultation approaches that were previously set out in the Local Government Act. And so we're very keen to be early adopters and you know, at the forefront in terms of engagement versus consultation. So it is a requirement under the Local Government Act. We are required to consult on our strategic plans. We are required to consult on our annual business plans. We are required to consult when things are happening out in the community, and it's better practice to consult or to engage in any event. We've done, and that's actually it on our strategic management framework. Any questions? It's a dry topic, I know, but there we go. We are required to do it.
I maybe just for the newer members, Kathy talked about having a robust community engagement strategy, particularly around our annual business plan. We are very deliberate with trying to provide plenty of opportunity for the community to share with us their views around service levels and expectations and the like. We have, unfortunately, probably not too dissimilar to many councils, not got a lot of community members actually along to some of those forums. So it is a constant challenge to try and make sure that we are getting good representative feedback, and that's in part why we introduced the focus group forums. But just give you a heads up in advance, as elected members, really encourage you to try and ensure that family, friends, colleagues, anyone that you can rope in to come along and have a listen to us on a couple of nights of the year can do so and contribute to some of our thinking. Peter?
Just on that note, and it's awesome to see the efforts that the council is making to have that two-way conversation with the community. Do we know of any other councils or anywhere far and wide where there are people that turn up? I mean, people want to complain, but they don't want to be part of the solution often. Do we know where it is working well, where the way that we're communicating with the community is more effective?
One of the reasons, in short answer, it's when councils are engaging around annual business plan and budget and strategic plans, etc., there are very few examples out there as to significant engagement actually occurring. Unless there is a burning issue or a burning platform, the majority of people are silent. It is one of the reasons why these reforms have been brought into the Local Government Act, because there were black and white requirements of consultation for councils in many of these drier processes, I suppose you could say. And so it has been changed so that it gives councils more scope for engaging as opposed to consulting. But if we have a look at the Foreshore Master Plan, the development of the Foreshore Master Plan process, the engagement that occurred there, the community feedback that came into that process was second to none. It was absolutely brilliant. The pieces of feedback and pieces of information that the council achieved through going out to the community, talking with the community, building from the ground up, as opposed to presenting, here's our annual business plan and budget for this year, what do you think about it? You know, it's a different conversation. And so instead of us trying to engage per se on an annual business plan and budget, it's how and what is it that we are engaging on, so that we actually then get the voice of the community into the council.
Can I just jump in before you, Mark? Yeah, that's really a massive credit about to the council about that engagement. And I think what you were just saying then, if I'm reading it correctly, is this dry topic of the annual business plan. In the way I'm looking at it, how do we connect that back to what is the heart and soul of Whyalla, so that they are engaged, so that when they say we want this, this and this, yeah, okay, you don't want your rates to go up and you don't want to pay for it, I think I don't have the answer. We're just sort of putting it out there.
Yep.
How do we bring this dry topic right to the salivating over the things that we want?
Yep.
How do we connect those two? I guess it's just a discussion point.
There's been some examples of other councils out there bringing innovative processes into the annual business plan and budget. For example, developing a monopoly game.
Oh, yeah.
And so giving play money out to members of the community and saying, okay, well, if you've got this bucket of money, how much are you going to spend on this service and this service and this service and this service? That does generate some additional input into these sorts of processes. The question is that the right place to be focusing our engagement effort? Are there other ways and other things to be focusing our engagement effort? Because the annual business plan and budget is not the only thing. So that is the conversation that on the 2-day workshop that we have with you, is to talk with you and the elected members. how do you want to lead out in the community in terms of engaging the community? What are the conversations that you want to have with the community that then you can bring back into this chamber for your decision making? And we'll do a deep dive down into what are some of the strategies, what's the conversation that you want to have out there. Mark?
I was just going to say, it's that engagement. I mean, at one stage I was dealing with 13 councils, and I've been to every one of the council meetings. I mean, the chick from Channel 4, we start back into just because there's nobody goes unless it's a topical, like the Bushel Master Plan, for instance. Something gets really hot for a couple of a meeting or two, and then just dissipates, and there's nobody goes to any of the meetings anywhere. It doesn't matter whether it's Mount Remarkable, Flinders Ranges Council, or very small councils, or Whyalla, Port Lincoln, the bigger councils. So, to your point, if we can find the secret to unlocking it so we can get people engaged, but I think it is sometimes very, very hard unless they've got a specific issue that they want to prosecute, or they've got a potential focus group that they want to deal with. So, and how we do it, I don't know. It's going to be a thing for all of us to push through. I think it's going to be very interesting.
What's frustrating was the fact that Justin does such a great job at doing what he does, explaining where the money goes, what we need it for, and there's nobody listening. That's the frustrating part. David, myself, Phil, and see it. Went to 2, we've done probably 8 of them. Can't remember seeing anybody else. And you're public, you were a ratepayer last year and the year before. You didn't go either.
Yeah.
So you expect the other people.
If I can just, sorry.
Sorry, I did turn my mic off because what Peter and Mark said kind of was a bit of what I was going to say. So comments, I guess, rather than questions. So my comments as a ratepayer, I know where the rates get spent. So when I get a rates notice and it's gone up, I go, holy crap, but I get it. I understand it. I'm not sure everybody does. And I think a part of our engagement needs to be around educating people where their money goes, asking people where they would like their money to go. What are their priorities? And I'm not saying that because someone says their priority is upgrading parks, that's where all the money goes. But I think if people feel like they have an input rather than gathering information. Bill, you said Justin speaks. The way I've always, rightly or wrongly, the way I've always looked at the information, it's not engagement. That council has done a lot in the past. It's been, like you say, Justin does a really good job of explaining where the money goes and that sort of thing. People don't want to. Yeah, I don't think people want to listen to, I think people want to be asked the question, where do you want your rates to go? What do you think? Not necessarily in a forum like this, though. I think it's a bit like when you've got a classroom full of students. You can say, right, has anybody got any questions? Anybody got any comments? No one does, but unless you specifically go to individual people. Yeah.
I think if I can just come in and link these two, Kathy mentioned before about the community survey. That does talk about what services and what level of satisfaction the community has with the services. So that's actually a really rich piece of data for us to help inform whether we're spending the money in the right area or not. I think the engagement, and when we get to the workshop with the councillors, that engagement takes many forms. All of you are actually out in the community all the time. Most of you are potentially on social media all the time. A number of you are members of community groups and actively involved with different community groups. So we get intelligence. We're constantly surrounded by intelligence. It's how we put our arms around that, distill that down, and to help inform our decision making. So it's not just the workshops around the annual business plan that inform the decisions. It's part of the consultation process, but there are many other ways that we can get that intel factored into our decision making. Phil?
Just one comment. CEO might shudder at what I'm about to say because I haven't discussed it with him. But as mayor, and having seen how things have gone in the past, I see one of my roles is to spearhead significant engagement campaign to get people out to the information centres. Just not taking it away from Justin, but I see very strongly that that is a role of mine in a particular way to aim at our residents, our ratepayers, to get them to engage. And that is something I will certainly take on board with the maximum ability to get some attention out there and see if we can change the results of last year.
I think that engagement, it takes many different forms, and engagement occurs across the whole of the spectrum, not just annual business plan and budgets. There are many different forms of engagement that need to be undertaken at all times during the whole year. And yeah, we'll have a deep dive into that during the 2-day workshop. And we can start to put some shape and form around the nature of engagement, including you, Mayor Stone, spearheading it. So, I'm going to move on to, conscious of time, wanted to give a very quick, brief update in terms of the civic building, Edward John Eyre High School. So, as you are all aware, this building is past its use by date, and we need to relocate from this building temporarily into the Edward John Eyre High School to start off with. But this is just a little bit of background. As you can see from the pictures there, we've had some structural issues with this building. Quite a lot of examination was undertaken into whether or not this building could be fixed at a reasonable price, also giving us knowing what is coming down the pipeline in terms of changes to this city and the resources that are needed in order to actually bring that all through, to give some growth capability, because frankly we're bursting at the seams here with desks and offices, etc. So we had a look at this building, what would it need to be fixed, and also to provide us with some future proofing. We engaged a company called Stallard Meek to undertake the review for us. Stallard Meek are an architectural firm, and their investigation looked at various options. Option 1 being to refurbish this building at the current location. Option 1A, to demolish this building and then to rebuild at the current location. Option 2, to relocate to Edward John Eyre High School. And option 3, to build a new council complex somewhere else on a different piece of land. Stallard Meek did the body of work, and they came up with four options, and prices in terms of the. Sorry, I'm just turning my page now. Amounts of money that it would potentially take in order to do each of those options. Option 1 there, temporary relocation and refurbishment, it would take about 24 months to actually do that work, and it would be coming at a cost of around $30.86 million. Option 1A in terms of, and I'm saying temporary relocation here because we would, regardless of what option we choose, we will need to do a temporary relocation because we cannot stay in this building from a work health safety point of view and its continued degradation. So we do need to move from this building. The option 1A, temporary relocation, demolition and a whole new build on this site, around 36.2 million, would take about 30 months to actually deliver. Option 2, the relocation and renovation, that's renovation of the Edward John Eyre High School, renovated over 2 stages, would take about 21 months and cost about $19.7 million. Or temporary relocation to Edward John Eyre High School and do a new build at another location, 39.7 million over 30 months of time. These options were considered by the council back on the 4th of July last year, and the council resolved to undertake further investigations on options 1A and option 2, those being to demolish and rebuild in the current location here, or to relocate the whole of the services permanently to Edward John Eyre High School. There needs to be a business case done of each of those options to understand what would be the flow-on impacts of the relocation of us as a civic building out of this area into the central and vice versa. We haven't commenced yet those further investigations. Those further investigations will commence early in the new year. But as I mentioned, we do need to do a temporary relocation from this building to the Edward John Eyre High School because of the work health safety risks that this building poses. In terms of that process, we are in the process of finalising a lease with the Education Department for that relocation. The lease is for a period of 4 years and for a peppercorn rate of $1 per year. The project plan in terms of that temporary relocation, we do plan on having that lease finalised with the Education Department by the 30th of December. The delay in getting that lease finalised is not from our end, it's from the Education Department's end and Crown Land. Crown Land, us taking occupation or relocating there is a change in use of the school. For civic purposes, and there needs to be a change in the trust that is wrapped around that land, and so Crown Land need to do that, and they are currently caught up in doing all of the lands work in the Riverland regions where the flooding is happening, so there's been a slight delay in that body of work. We then have undertaken an audit of this building and also of the Edward John Eyre High School to understand what needs to move from here, where it will fit at the Edward John Eyre High School, and also what level of works need to happen at the Edward John Eyre High School in order to accommodate us. Those audits have been done, and high-level designs and drawings are largely underway as we speak in terms of what departments will be located where, what the nature of the setup is going to be, where the chamber will be located, how the chamber will be set up, and how formalities will actually be worked through. Those high-level designs and drawings will be completed by the end of next week, but they are largely underway as we speak. Once we have those high-level designs and drawings, we will need to gain development approval because it does represent a change in use, but we're not anticipating that the development approval will be difficult. It's already had a review by the Building, Fire and Safety Committee to ensure that we're actually structuring the relocation appropriately. Once we get the high-level designs and drawings, we will then go out to tender for the works to be undertaken. And when I say works, what we're talking about there is some minor construction works in terms of a couple of walls. We're anticipating converting one of the toilets into a small kitchenette up on the first floor, and there will be cabling and communications work that need to be done. That we'll look to have that released by the end of this year, undertake the works then in February 2023, and look to undertake the relocation by the end of March, early April is what we're aiming for at this moment in time. This is just some pictures of the Edward John Eyre High School. As you can see, the top left is the outside. The top right is where the customer service counter will be, so that's where members of the public will have the primary first point of contact. Bottom left is one of the classrooms that will be converted into a room for one of our teams. These classrooms are currently being configured whereby there will be 6 staff members in each of the classrooms. Those 6 staff members and the way that it will be set up have been assessed to allow for proper airflow, proper work health safety, etc., and also accommodating the different locations of air vents and doors and so on. It's actually quite an asymmetrical proposition for us. So there's not one setup that can actually occur across the whole of the site. And then bottom right is, and it's a dark picture, my apologies, but that's the room where we will be and are proposing to locate the chamber for so your decision making and relocate the furniture in this room. When the windows are open and the curtains are open, it's much more light filled, and it's the stage room of the school, and it will be set up audio and visually quite well. So, any questions?
Kathy, a question. So you're talking about going out to tender soon. Will we see the final documentation and the estimated cost before it goes out? So we know what to look for on the basis that council has said all along, minimal cost, nothing fancy.
Yep. So principles that we have applied all along in this is exactly that, minimal costs, nothing fancy. It's only the minimal amounts of work that will be needing to be undertaken. We will have some indicative costs before we go out to tender, but the tender is a design and construct tender, which will give us much more certainty in costs. So there will be a hold point. The works are simply and primarily around the communications and cabling. And again, there we're looking to go as minimal as possible by taking an approach of going fully Wi-Fi as opposed to cabling into each of the classrooms, because that will actually come at quite a considerable cost and lead time to get that sort of work done. So what we're wanting to do is to utilise the high gig connections that run along Nicholson Avenue, have Wi-Fi connections in every classroom, and only have 1 or 2 rooms hardwired, whereby if staff have got very large files, such as our infrastructure staff and our planning staff, when they have large files that they need to be downloading or transferring, they'll be able to go to a different room to plug into a port to allow those high those big files, to use a technical term, those big files to be transferred. I don't believe we'll have definitive costs at the time of going out to tender. It's when we get the tenders back that the more definitive and certain costs will be known. As I said, minimal works in terms of construction works, other than a kitchen to be installed on the first floor, so that staff on the first floor are not having to go down the stairs, walk quite a long way to the staff kitchen through a public area with a coffee cup, basically. So it's really a matter of ensuring that that we're keeping staff safe and not walking through public areas with hot cups of coffee and etc. Probably the last thing to say is that, again, the construction is not going to be fancy. This is a temporary relocation until such time as that next body of work of investigation occurs as to what's our permanent home.
Two things. Firstly, do we have to do a prudential report for this? No?
No, doesn't meet the threshold.
Okay. The other thing is that one thing we didn't consider is, what about private investment and a lease back to council if we go to another alternative? Private investment and a lease back to council.
Yep. That will be part of the consideration of that bigger body of work. So so we got a temporary relocation, which we need to sort of deal with separately to the decisions that council need to make in terms of the permanent future home for the council, whether it's at Edward John Eyre or somewhere else. The slide talked about a new council building. That building could be a public-private partnership. It could be a partnership with the state government. It could be that we just rent a space as opposed to own. So all of those considerations will be picked up as part of that review in terms of what does the future home look and feel like, and how is it financed.
Can I just correct in terms of a prudential report? this relocation doesn't require a prudential report. A new build or a new whatever will require a prudential report, yes.
Exactly.
One thing that I also didn't mention, the lift at the Edward John Eyre High School is not DDA compliant as in its current form. Whilst that doesn't stop us from relocating to that building, we are getting estimates and quotes for the installation of an external lift so that we might be there for 4 years, and staff from an access point of view, members of the community from an access point of view, we should have a DDA compliant lift. We are in discussions with the Education Department in terms of a contribution to the funding of an external lift so that it's not fully council funded. That will be part of the information that comes back into council for decision making as to the works that occur at the school. But certainly having a DDA compliant lift is something that we are absolutely looking at. The other thing is that we are having conversations with the hydrogen jobs plan people for the potential for a co-location of those state strategic projects at the Edward John Eyre High School with us as well. There is a location in the building which is separate from the council staff areas, but is in an area that would be fabulously or could be fabulously activated in terms of community engagement, in terms of community information, and also the relationship and development and input into those projects between council and the state government as well.
I'm a little bit, just a bit confused. Is there a rent that is paid to the department for using that building? How does that work?
$1 a year.
Okay, fantastic. That's a good deal. The other question I had is all those, like the lift, those sorts of things, would that then make it more attractive, like that $19.7 billion for that option? Would that bring that cost down with the works that are being done for the temporary relocation? Does that make it more attractive down the track, perhaps?
Potentially, but the amount of money that we're spending on this temporary relocation is minuscule. So the installation of an external lift currently is in the ballpark of $250,000.
If I can just add, whilst it sounds like a small rental, which it is, council will assume all responsibility for building maintenance and grounds maintenance, other than anything that's structural that the landlord, as the state government being the owner of the building, would need to attend to. But all of the utilities, the maintenance, grounds and the like become our responsibility.
That's the same arrangement that will be on this building here already with those costs. They're just going to transfer to the new.
That's, yeah, so similar costs, slightly similar but different. So things like electricity, telecommunication, security, cleaning, and the like, which we have this building, will be able to be relocated to the other building. The other building, in addition, what the other building's got that doesn't exist here is the significant grounds, on-site car parking. So, and we'll need to also do things like signage as well. So there will be some costs that will be more specific to that site, but we expect that the costs that we save here will be commensurate with what we'll have to spend at the other location. So it should be cost neutral.
Yeah, if I can also add to that, the temporary relocation and the design that we've implemented is to look to place all staff on one wing, and therefore from a building management perspective reduce the costs of running a much larger building because we won't be occupying part of it. Of course, it will need to be maintained and basic building management systems continue, but we will be looking to reduce operating costs through ensuring that our footprint at the building is only what is actually needed for us to be delivering the services that we deliver.
Two-part question. Was Whyalla High School considered? Considering that's the best looking building in the city by 100 miles, and I just would hate to think it's just going to sit there and go to waste.
It was looked at, but that would actually require more work to make it fit for purpose, even in an interim capacity, compared to the Edward John Eyre. Just using nice round numbers, Edward John Eyre in terms of condition, fit for purpose, walk in, basically plug and play. It's probably about an 8 out of 10. While it would have been probably more like a 3 or 4 out of 10.
So what is going to be the plan for that building?
So the state government needs to determine what it's going to do with that building. We've put forward the council's desired repurposing of that building to create a centre of excellence around hydrogen production and renewable energy, and sort of similar to Lot 14 in Adelaide, which has got a focus on the space industry, having sort of an equivalent ecosystem set up in Whyalla focused on hydrogen and renewable energy, having research, education, technology and industry application all under one roof. We see that some synergies with what the building was first built for. It was built as a tech college to train the boilermakers, electricians, fitters required back in the day at the steelworks and the shipbuilding. This building, the building could now be part of the collateral of the facilities in our city to train the future workforce needed in the emerging industry. So we think there's a lot of synergy there, potentially home to the Hilt CRC, SACOM, potentially GFG and other corporates having their office accommodation in that building, whilst their hard plants or facilities will be located at steelworks, mine sites and Port Beniphan, for example. All of the visiting, executive tech staff, major suppliers and the like could have that as their the source where they go and they meet and do a lot of the business in that ecosystem before they actually spin out to, or they go out to the hard infrastructure. So that's what council's currently advocating as part of our economic development strategy and our advocacy documents. The Foreshore Master Plan looked at that as one option, boutique hotel offering as another option. Again, anyone who wants to convert that into hotel accommodation is going to have to spend a fair bit of money, and because it is state heritage listed as well, the adaptive reuse of heritage buildings typically does come at a premium cost. So it's a work in progress. I think it's fair to say at this point in time the state government doesn't have a plan or vision as to how that building could or should be used, and the fact that it's currently still sitting there I think is actually a positive, even though I may not feel that, because 2 days in to my role here as CEO, second day I was in the seat, I had education department ringing me to say that they were looking to gear up to have the two high school sites put to the market. And when I started asking questions, well, what do you mean by that? Again, probably being a little bit unkind, they were essentially going to go to the market with a blank piece of paper and say to the market, what do you want to do with these sites? Not satisfactory. Both of those sites, or each of those sites, is strategically important to our city, both in terms of the location and the size of the sites. You put the two together, and what happens on those two sites will fundamentally influence the evolution of our city going forward. So that was the very first meeting that I had as CEO together with Mayor Clare, with the Premier, was to talk about those two high school sites and to seek a joined up approach, so a partnership approach between the council and the state government in terms of master planning and looking at the appropriate land uses for those two sites. And we're still on that merry-go-round, trying to get that purchase with the state government to have a really good conversation about what both of those sites could be, noting that I think the pace of focus and activity for Whyalla is sort of about to exponentially go through the roof. I think it's taken us 12 months to get to this point. I think within 12 months' time, I think we'll be having a very different conversation, both around this chamber and with the state government, about what's happening in and around Whyalla.
And the only other question, this unsightly scaffold in the main street, how long is that going to be sitting there like it is?
Until the building is demolished.
Because it's not a great look.
No, it's not a great look.
Not great for business either.
And it's not great for business. and it's a legacy issue that we've got a tired old building here that presents a risk. I'm not going to overplay it in terms of the likelihood of it happening, but it presents a risk that building material can actually fall from this building, and we don't want it falling straight onto the footpath with some, unfortunate person just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So we know it's unsightly. We know it's not good for the main street, but it is a necessary risk mitigation strategy. I was a short and quick response, but it will likely be there until such time as the building gets demolished, because other remedial actions to try and provide mitigation for things falling off this building. And I can walk to my office and get a lump of concrete for you if you want to see what's come off the building in the past. You certainly wouldn't want to be on the wrong end of that piece of concrete. So it is an unfortunate situation we've got, and not one we're going to be able to get around easily.
Can I just add on that? And absolutely risk. At the time when all of this happened, we engaged with the mutual liability scheme in terms of risk management and risk mitigation. The scheme is actually our insurer, and they're requiring us to undertake and ensure that we keep the risk mitigated.
Just obviously I've got one of those shops in the main street, and one whole side of my shop is covered by the scaffolding, and I get lots of people commenting on it, and I always respond that I would rather that was there than something would fall on someone's head. It doesn't impact on my business, but what does impact on my business is council employees parking in one of the 5 available parking spots for the whole day. When we're restricted anyway, we've lost a couple with the scaffolding, and then people come and park in a 2-hour parking spot for their whole working day. That does impact significantly.
Happy for you to send me the registration numbers of the vehicles in question, and we'll attend to that. We have sent out information both within the organisation and within the Main Street precinct that the 2-hour parking spots are designated for good reason, and we certainly don't want staff not abiding by the parking requirements. Irene has just brought in, so this, Kristen, do you want to talk to where this comes from?
Yes, this is a piece of concrete that.
Microphone.
This is a piece of concrete that we've been able to take off the exterior of the building. So we're literally up there on the scaffold doing an inspection of the brickwork and mortar that we had around the outside, and the engineers were literally able to, just using their hands, just pluck it off the building. There was no mortar holding it in anymore. A gust of wind and that would have been falling down onto the veranda and either potentially sort of punching through to the footpath or bouncing off onto the main street and potentially a passing car. One of the options we did look at for securing the bricks and mortar of the building to the outside is to put it in almost like a shrink wrap, and that has been done at other locations. But the poor quality of the exterior of the building meant we had nothing to literally put the shrink wrap onto. So we weren't able to find a solid piece to sort of link it all back to and tighten it all up and make it safe and secure. It is literally so unstable up there that we had nothing else to tie into. So if you are out there during the day, you'll be able to see up there that there are bits and pieces. You can see it's almost like a chipped tooth. You can see where we have had to remove pieces before they fall. So the scaffold is literally there. The scaffold itself isn't doing anything for the building. The scaffolding is enabling us to have a netting structure there so that it falls, is cushioned before it hits the veranda or bounces out. So until the old cinema is demolished, it'll be there as a safety equipment. Yeah.
We're very happy to take councillors for a tour of this building at some stage. I'm going to suggest that given the time of night, we won't do that tonight, but we can set up a time and actually just walk you through it looks like a big building from the outside, and it is a big building, but our actual occupancy space is quite small. And if you can just think above this ceiling here, there's probably about what, a 40-foot, 50-foot void between this ceiling and the shell of the cinema. And the shell of the cinema, it's got a hard concrete roof. Water's got in on and sat on that roof many times over a long period of time, and the water over the years has got actually into the concrete. The reason why that, if you bring that image back up, what caused the concrete to subside, which is on the next floor up, was that the water has got into the steel Rio in the concrete, caused the Rio to rust, and that's actually then caused the concrete to give way. If you think about what would be involved to attend to that, noting that that's just a portion of the roof and floor structure, you can start to see how quickly things would add up. And just to make things worse, the shell itself has been leaking, but inside the shell, we've actually got box gutters that are actually leaking inside the building. So box gutters are notorious for leaking at the best of times. We got box gutters at 40 feet high that you just can't get to, that are leaking inside our building. And that's before we then turn to all of the other issues around the building in terms of the layouts, stairs, hallways, access, that are all create work health and safety challenges for us, and don't lend itself to a productive working environment where you've got literally a rabbit warren of offices throughout this building. And again, the best way to get a handle on that is to go for a tour around the building, and we'll do that so you can understand what the building looks and feels like. Peter?
That would be great to have a tour of it to see with our own eyes and witness, etc. So that would be really, really good to do that. And this is somewhat of a minor point in what we just talked about, but I see that there are 3 spots on either side. Is it appropriate? Is it possible? It looks like if we shifted that bit back a bit, that we could bring those 6 in and have a circular thing. Is that a done thing? I think it would be kind of cool to have everyone included sitting at the same table. I think that would represent quite well, and it looks like it's quite possible if we had the space in the new room, which is why I'm mentioning it now.
No, good pick up, and we certainly have plenty of space in the new chamber at the Edward John Eyre, so I understand that this would create a circle if it was all put together. So, yep. So, yeah, good pick up, good suggestion. Is there any other questions or comments on the relocation at this point in time? Again, more information will come. It will be potentially one of the most challenging questions that you or decisions that you will need to make in your next 4-year term. Can I say you will need to make a decision in the next 4-year term? You will not be able to kick it down the line for another council to make the decision. It is one of the hard decisions that you will need to make.
No, sorry, also completely different topic. The dates that we settled on for the 2-day workshop for elected members, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do now because the EP LGA conference is being held on that Thursday and Friday. So we do need to another 2 dates.
Do you want to do that via email?
Yeah.
Maybe we do it via a survey,
Yeah,
like
all right.
Survey Monkey or something.
We'll do a Survey Monkey.
Provide some options and just get people to put their preference, first, second, and third preferences. And I think we're just going to have to land on a weekend where the majority of councillors are available.
Yeah.
The battery life of that is 3 hours.
What?
The battery life of these is 3 hours.
Yeah, mine's just about to die too.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, we'll close the meeting. Thank you for your participation tonight. Again, I apologise in retrospect that some of it's a little bit dry, but it is important that you understand sort of the strategic framework that we operate within. We've got our council meeting on next week. So that's when we'll see all of you next. We've got no more training this week, have we? No? Yep. So you'll get your agendas Thursday at the latest, Thursday afternoon at the latest. And if you've got any questions, once you see the agenda, please just reach out with a phone call or an email. Okay, thank you. So.